Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. If you didn't have time to grab snacks, they're still out there in the cafeteria around the corner, and you can help yourself. My name is Courtney Ray. I'm the Director of Growth here at Open Signal. Our mission is to nurture the change-making power of community media in service of a more just and equitable world. You're in Studio A. We're here to celebrate media makers here in town and to raise funds for local organizations working in media and arts. Our partners today, alongside Open Signal, are Kickstand Comedy, City Club, the Agora Center for Journalism at the University of Oregon, and CityCast, Portland. You can donate to to Open Signal, City Club, and Kickstand Comedy in the Give Guide, and there are links out in the lobby you can just scan to help us with our fundraising goals. There's a lot of big give days where you kind of get entered to win big prize packages. I think those usually happen on Wednesday, so you'll want to check those out. It's giveguide.org. First, I'm going to introduce Kayla Kennett with City Club of Portland. This is a member-led nonprofit working to promote informed, constructive, and respectful public dialogue on community issues. And you can find both of us after the event if you want to talk about our work or work with us on future events. Kayla, come on up.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to Open Signal for hosting us today, and Courtney for supporting this wild idea for a joint panel discussion. I think it's going to be really great. Our panel today is called Beyond the Noise, Media That's Moving Portland, and will feature two panels. One that's more on the traditional journalism side of things, and one that's about community storytelling and why having both of those matters, and how and we really want to connect it to Open Signal's work and showcase all of the different ways that they can support community storytelling and independent media here in Portland. And I'm very excited that we were able to partner with some also related businesses on this program. We have the Agora Center for Journalism, which is at the University of Oregon in Portland, and CityCast Portland, which is a daily podcast and newsletter that does a lot of really great journalism. And we've also partnered with another nonprofit that I'm a big fan of, Kickstand Comedy. Kickstand Comedy exists to break down some of the traditional barriers to getting involved in comedy. They do improv, sketch, and a lot of really great programming. They had a storytelling program last night where they partnered with another nonprofit, Accelerate Women. So they're very much a community-oriented comedy space, and we recommend that you check them out. So we have two people from Kickstand today helping moderate these two panels, which is Chris Williams. Chris Williams founded Front Porch Sessions, which is a storytelling program, and is also an improviser and instructor at Kickstand. And then Christian Shear, who identifies as a clown, a clown about town. She's in an awesome Shakespeare show called Love Shakespeare. She's the educational programs director at Kickstand. So if you choose to take classes there, which I definitely recommend, even though I haven't done it yet, she will be guiding you through that process. So welcome to Chris and Kristen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to everybody for having us. We're really excited to host this panel. We're going to get things started. Our first panel today is on making the news, and we'll be exploring like formal journalism and how it shapes the public conversation. We have very experienced panelists here. They many of whom are working journalists or experienced journalists, and they can help describe like what it means to be newsworthy and what goes into moving these stories from the first idea into publication. I want to introduce our panelists today. We're really excited to have them. We're really excited to have them. And then at the end, there'll be time for some questions. So please welcome Althea Billings, news director for KBOO Community Radio. Very good. Please welcome Donovan Scribes. He's the owner of D-Scribes LLC, and he's a contributing columnist to the Portland Mercury. Is that correct? Yeah, very good. We also have Jeremiah Hayden, who reports on housing and homelessness and some political topics, who's a reporter for the Portland Mercury. Yeah. And Noah Karandanis, editor-in-chief of PSU Vanguard. Correct? Yeah? Great. Welcome. Thank you so much. So we want this panel to just be more conversational than a direct interview panel. So just chime in with your expertise and your thoughts about these topics. We've shared a lot of the questions ahead of time with the panelists, and many of our guests here today in the audience also have these questions in their program. So let's just get started, and I want to just throw it to you first. Althea, we have about 20 minutes to hear from your collective wisdom here on what counts as news. What makes something become official news? Yeah.
It's a great question, and something that is often sort of obtuse to the audience, even though I think if you spend a little time in journalism, you're like, oh, obviously we have to talk about that. If you end up in J School, they talk about the 7 factors of newsworthiness, but more broadly, I think when I think about it, it's about what does the audience need to know to go about their day-to-day life, and different outlets approach that, I think, in different ways, depending on who their audience is and what their incentive structure is, I think, and what they want, how they want people to react. Do they want them to go out into their community and make a change or get involved or whatever it is, or, express outrage, as sometimes the case may be. So it's for me, I think about what does the audience need, and how do we serve them with information that, in your day-to-day life, if you're working 9 to 5, that, that's not necessarily something you access any other way.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts on this from our panel? Yeah. How do news stories get selected? What gets chosen? What's the process there?
I think there can be a range of ways that editors, or outlets more broadly choose the news. Sometimes there's just like a service to the community. I feel like that's sort of the best way to do news. You're like in a community, the community needs to know something, maybe like weather events or something like that. You're gonna be whatever. It's not to go into too many hypotheticals, but there's like an ice storm happening, and so you need to know that, and so you say this is very newsworthy. You can also hold governments accountable. That's a huge one. These days, that can be like locally, to the national level, internationally, holding elected officials accountable for the work that they're doing. That's sort of where I end up doing a lot of news. Sort of unfortunately, with the for-profit structure of news, a lot of outlets, I think, are choosing based on clicks and advertising. So it's like when you hear that sort of clickbait kind of thing, you'll see these headlines. It's partly to just keep the organization alive.
Sure.
Because they have to sell advertising for that. When people click through, it's not just about the clicks, it's what they tell the businesses how many clicks they've had that month, which means that they can then sell those ads. And that can be a real incentive for some media outlets.
So I hear you describing a pressure put on various media sources. What other processes or pressures are at play when you're trying to get your organization to communicate a story? Or,
I think that, as a student journalist working within a campus community, that for-profit structure is not there as much. The pressures are much more internal. There's all of these varying groups on campus that are vying for attention. They want to be covered. They want to be covered in a particular way as well. And so when we are thinking in our newsroom, what is newsworthy for the week? We're a weekly print publication. And so something has to get in the paper every week. And so thinking about that, it is kind of building off what Althea said. What is directly impacting PSU community members, whether it be students, whether it be faculty, staff, or just people living around the park blocks and their lives centering around the park blocks. So I think that for-profit structure, the luxury of being a student journalist is not worrying about that as much, having funding from student fees rather than advertising.
So I'm the outlier on this panel because I'm no longer a reporter. I'm a communications consultant, and so I'm often working to get things in the news for clients. And so in that frame, there are a lot of stories that are newsworthy that don't get covered, and that's because they don't have a me on the team that's able to get those stories to a reporter's ear, you know, like, and that's a lot of what is newsworthy is what a reporter even hears about, you know, like somebody can very well would have covered this thing that happens, but if it's kind of like if the tree falls in the forest, did it make a sound type of thing? And there's a lot of trees falling in Portland that never make a sound, and so that's something that I always am bugged by. Like, for example, I just had proximity to somebody having their husband kidnapped by ICE and transferred across the country within, you know, a matter of days. And this person was saying this was one of the worst experiences that they've had in their life. And, you know, their partner is sitting there with the newborn baby. They just had their child. And so she's got 2 other children, and she's navigating this thing right now.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get it on the news, but because of timelines and things like that, I was not able to get it on the news. That doesn't change the fact that this was a newsworthy thing.
Right.
As it was happening. Somebody who has a newborn just had their husband kidnapped by ICE, you know? So those are things that are happening in this community all the time. For especially thinking about Black Portland, there are often stories that it very well would have been a story, but because of the structures right now around Black stories in Oregon and Portland, in the country for that matter, those stories often don't get pushed through. So even for me as a consultant, when I'm working with clients, that's also something that I'm always trying to make sure is threaded through the work. Is that, like, we can be talking about labor, but where is the Black perspective in this thing? Or we can be talking about education. Where's the Black perspective in this particular news story? Or we can be talking about Measure 110, but where's the Black perspective in this specific larger policy conversation that we're having, and who are the people who can tell that story authentically right now? And so I think there's also, like you were saying, what are the incentive structures? I think that same thing applies to, like, what is the perspective of a newsroom? And it doesn't even mean that people are doing things insidiously. It just means that stories in this space where there aren't many Black storytellers that can get the news to the newsrooms, that Black folks are often being left out of the conversation.
You'll help educate me and potentially some members of our audience, but like, I feel like certain organizations or news outlets have editorial priorities, right? And, you know, how do those editorial priorities get decided as, like, the bigger umbrella of what news they're voicing? Like, you're talking about authenticity in how you tell stories, right? So, yeah, how do these editorial priorities get decided, and who decides them?
It's worth saying briefly, like, while newsrooms want clicks for advertising, like, most have some sort of firewall between the advertising department, you know, and their editorial world. You know, how kind of blurry those lines are can depend on just how seriously they take that, you know, kind of concept. But, you know, to the point, there are like a lot of issues, you know, sort of like, for anyone following along, sort of this fourth question in this first section, like, one of the biggest challenges I think in community reporting is that you can hear individual story after individual story that is absolutely worth the public knowing about. And there's only a certain capacity to tell those stories. I want to go to everything that I hear about. I want to do that, you know, because I take it, it's very serious. I think probably all of us here would love to go out and tell every story. I covered homelessness for a few years at Street Roots before I started at the Mercury, and would get voicemails all the time, talk to people on the streets, talk to people who are vendors at the, you know, with the organization, and like just heartbreaking things that you're like, how are people kind of not aware of this and the depth of it, and like the, you know, just the sort of violence that people are experiencing. And at the same time, like, you can do 3, maybe 5 stories in a week if you're gonna really get into the depth of that. So one of the things that I think becomes necessary out of that is to try to cover structural systems. Like, what does this represent for more than this one person? How did this person end up here?
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to homelessness, like, these are all systems of violence. Why are Black Portlanders overrepresented in homelessness statistics? Because they're overrepresented in every other systemic thing, structurally, that pushes them into that place. And that's the same for trans people, people with disabilities. And so covering those structures, I think, lends us like the ability to talk about one individual story at a time that may be representative of a lot of other stories. And that's kind of how some editorial decisions, I think, get made.
So speaking to that, and you know, if you want to chime in on this too, Althea, how can you know, community members form relationships with organizations to help get their story told? What's the right way to go about that so that they feel like they're represented in the media? Yeah.
Yeah, just one quick email. No, I'm kidding. I don't think that there's really a one size fits all. You know, we're all coming at this from different perspectives. Portland, you know, relatively speaking, has a thriving like small media ecosystem. There's a lot of places where people can, you know, find a foothold that they might not be able to in another city of our size that has like one huge dominating paper. Obviously we have that, but there's a lot of smaller publications as well. I think the things that, you know, catch my eye for sure is stuff that's like community action, stuff going on from the grassroots, like people in the community trying to make stuff happen. That's like what I find to be, you know, motivating, and also something that I know that our listeners and our audience really care about. Like, they want to be plugged into those sorts of stories. So I think if you are somebody who has a story that you feel ought to be told, I think kind of as much context, as much of that sort of global perspective of why something's important and why somebody should care about it, I think that is definitely one way to go about it. I will also say, KBOO Community Radio, Open Signal, there are lots of opportunities in this town to tell your own stories or to help people in your community tell stories. That's one thing that I really love about the work that I do, is I'm training volunteers to become reporters, training them on things that, you know, some in years gone by would have been really locked in an ivory tower if you didn't go to J school. But it's something that is accessible. There's actually not a test of if you're allowed to be a journalist or not. And, you know, going into the community and being able to tell stories that are, you know, from that perspective, as opposed to, you know, kind of from a top down or this sort of parachute idea of journalism, I think is something that's really valuable. And people in Portland know about Portland. And so I think it's really special when we can, you know, connect with people and allow them to tell their own story instead of telling them how to feel.
Yeah, that's great. Other thoughts about this from the panel? How can people connect with media organizations to get their story told? Yeah.
I would say I'll say from my perspective of just, if there are more people that are the connecting points that already have those relationships with the media and community, I think those things help get the right stories out, because I don't think it's all incumbent on the reporter, just like you were saying. Like the reporters can't go out and form every single relationship, and the community can't spend all of its time going and like trying to get their stuff on the news. Like there's capacity issues on both sides of those things, and so if there are more rooted communications people, PR people that can be those in-betweens, I think it helps the whole. At least that's what has been on this side of storytelling for me,
Yeah.
is seeing that really helps everybody. Because I know reporters are trying to tell good stories as well, and community is trying to get their stories out. And so, yeah.
That might be where someone like you comes in as a communications consultant and trying to advocate for those stories. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just use even like the example, like when you were at Street Roots, I think that's where we actually very first connected, was like on the Measure 110 story. And like we talked quite a bit actually. That's I was like, I like this dude. Like you know, like,
Nice.
because it was, we talked a lot about Measure 110 and what it was supposed to be, where the flaws were, how it was being propagandized by groups like People for Portland, and you know, just like people are really drilling down that everything was wrong about Measure 110, and being able to talk to you at length about like what was going on and who in the community was doing what, standing up transition shelters and like detox centers and all of these things, and be like literally there's a level of lying that is happening right now about what this is actually doing. And the story that you ended up writing on that, like, it helped change some of the course of what the dialogue was around Measure 110, because at the time that we were talking about it, it was pretty much on a track to be fully repealed.
Yeah.
It was like, it was
And
that bad.
That's
and
where we really need journalists and communicators to come in. And
Yeah.
I think what we're identifying here is that there's, like you said, capacity issues on both sides. So it might be interesting to like parlay, you know, this identification of a problem into like what we hope for journalism in the next 10 years. We do have someone who works with student journalists here. What do you see for journalism in the next 10 years? What's your hope that journalism could look like? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, being on this panel with people in their careers now of journalism and kind of just beginning mine, I do see a lot of hope with the work that student publications are doing. I've had the privilege of working in 2 newsrooms. I worked at University of Portland's The Beacon as well, and just connecting with various student media groups in the Portland and Oregon area. There is this feeling of, okay, there is an issue of journalism's not like this glamorous job that, you know, is in the movies or anything. You know, you don't get to wear the fedora and go out and like have your little trench coat, but there is like a hope for embedding within communities, and I think that's what student media does particularly well. Is I come across stories because I'm in a random elective class with someone, and they, you know, they've seen my photo on, you know, the Instagram or whatever, and they feel comfortable coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I heard about this thing. I think I would like to, you know, submit an opinion piece on it or a column or whatever." And so within the next 10 years, I'd like to see journalism, and within J schools particularly, Portland State doesn't have a journalism program. And so coming at it from not like a theoretical point, but journalists as caregivers for the communities in which they serve. I
Yeah.
think that moving away from like this fly on the wall journalist kind of caricature that has come about,
Yeah.
and into someone who is embedded in the communities in which they're serving and actively taking a role of caring through agenda setting, through figuring out, you know, setting the dialogue around these important issues. I think within the next 10 years, broadly speaking, a more caring journalism rather than a more profit-driven or, you know, one that only prizes objectivity above all else.
Yeah. How's that landing with folks?
What that made me think of, particularly with what you were saying, is this idea of reciprocity and mutuality. I think is important. That I'm seeing it come more into the space of journalism and in storytelling. That, you know, it's less of this sort of exploitative nature, which it certainly still is in many cases. But, you know, there's plenty of people out there who have had like a bad taste in their mouth because of an interaction that they've had with a journalist, you know? And so I think having a culture of, you know, the reciprocity of like that, it's helpful to the community to be able to shed light on a particular issue, and it's helpful to the newsroom to be able to tell meaningful stories like that broadens their audience. There is a way to sort of think about it in those terms that I think allows for a different agenda setting, kind of as you said, and a different attitude towards the role that journalism and media and storytelling can play in communities.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost time to move on to the
Yeah.
next problem. But
Yeah, let's move on to the next topic. And we already touched on it a little bit here, which is objectivity and truth. So it's going to be the same structure. You know, we'll just have you collectively think about these topics out loud with our audience. So yeah, what does objectivity and truth mean in journalism today? There's a number of questions on this topic that you all have gotten in advance, as have our audience. Why don't we start with you, Donovan? Yeah, objectivity and truth. Here we go.
Yeah. So I don't believe in that, and that's in part because I didn't come, when I was in journalism, I didn't come to it by way of going through a J school pipeline. I came to the Portland Observer when I was fresh out of college, not studying journalism, and just asked if I could write and have my own column at the Portland Observer. I didn't call ahead of time. I just was like very in my 20-year-old ego at that moment. And then I kept calling down there, and they eventually just brought me in, and instead of like having me write a column where I was just like pontificating on things, they had me write a news story, and that was the cover of the Portland Observer, and that sent me on my track for years to be a journalist. But when I was in journalism, I never like believed in that aspect of like I'm just this, like you were saying, like a fly on the wall, and I don't have a perspective. Like I'm here, you know, and I very clearly have, you know, a view on these things, and it's going to show up in my reporting. I think like the last quote, the first quote, those things tell a lot, but also just generally people, you know, if you read the Oregonian and you read the Portland Mercury talking about the same topic, you can see that there are different perspectives of the same information. You know what I mean? And so like to act like that's not true is also like part of the lie, you know, like of objectivity. And, you know, for me now being on the funny thing is like it's been a 360 of like now I actually have a column, you know, like but because of the background in journalism, I like my things are so heavily reported on, even when I'm just giving my opinion on something. Like I just wrote about the fact that we have the highest eviction levels in our state's history, and that was true in 2022, is true in 2023, 24, 25 is going to be even more true in 2026. The way I wrote about that was very much from an artistic perspective, but it was also very much on a reporter perspective. And if the Oregonian was writing about it just from a reported perspective, they have a opinion on it. But I bet you if the Portland Monthly even wrote about it, it would have a different bent on that same information. And I know that if KBOO reported on it, it would be a different perspective on that same information. And so we have to be real about those things. And last thing I'll say on this, that's sometimes why certain news outlets don't get invited to certain press conferences as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because people know that they might be held more accountable.
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear the panel discuss that more. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is like our striving potentially to be neutral. I don't know where that is. And also talking about or telling the truth and how those two might, contradict each other.
And it also sounds like you're saying that the idea of being neutral in a way is almost dangerous. that that's out there because people are bringing in their own perspectives? Or yeah, please, I'm just curious.
I think a lot of it, like, I don't have any data on this, but I think a lot of it comes from a white perspective. Like, you know how white folks sometimes are like, I don't really think about my culture. I'm just a white person. And it's like, it's a whole political structure around your whiteness. You're not the norm, but it's like, it's a pretend thing to act like, I'm just a white person. No, you're not. And so, like, that's the same thing with objectivity to me. And because in America, journalism, the way all access points are in America, like, it's so centered around whiteness that is one of the things that I think is pushed out as, like, this is just the news. No, it's not, you know? So anyways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to add to that. Yeah, this idea of objectivity is extremely fraught. And a little journalism history for you. Like, it used to be held to such a degree of, like, that you have to be so objective that journalists of color couldn't talk about things going on in their communities. It had to be a white journalist going to do it. Women journalists couldn't talk about abortion rights because they would be biased about it. Like, that's the attitude. And some of that has been broken down over time, but I think it's important for us to question that, because I think that there's a difference between prizing, and because what do we consider to be objective? And I think that oftentimes it's like larger, well-established publications that get to determine that they're the objective ones and everybody else has a bent on it. And I think if we can let that go, there's actually a lot more information that we can glean, and we can be better both news consumers and news producers as a result.
Interesting, yeah.
It's not that objectivity, you know, is like a cudgel that we need to, like, you know, square up against people with, but, you know, we still want to provide verifiable information. We still want to inform people of different perspectives on an issue, but the idea that objectivity exists is very murky to me. And I think it's important for us to break it down too, especially, I don't know, one of the things when we were prepping for this, I was thinking about how a lot of times I get frustrated by larger publications, kind of like mainstream media, often using really like watered down language to describe something that's going on. And I think, you know, it to me, it becomes very apparent when it's like a national media organization talking about something happening in Portland, and they equivocate to no end about what exactly is going on here. And it's like, that's not true. Like, why won't you just say that this is what happened? It's extremely frustrating. But that's in service of, or trying to chase this idea, oh, we're being objective, we're not saying anything how it actually is.
Right.
Or using too strong of language.
So how the objectivity can in fact obscure the truth of what's
Totally.
going on. Yeah, Jeremiah.
Yeah, don't get me started on this.
We've done it, Jeremiah. We've gotten you started.
Okay,
Go for it.
This is your chance. Go for it.
I mean, these examples both from Althea and Donovan are like exactly right. I mean, who started this idea of objectivity? Like, white dudes smoking cigarettes in an editorial room. They were like, we're objective. We are the truth. Whiteness is the truth. Male whiteness is the truth. And everything outside of that, please don't pull that quote.
Yes.
Some journalist here from the New York Times is going to be like, Jeremiah said whiteness is the truth.
Finally, someone telling the truth.
But like, that's what these people like kind of determined, right? And then they created these structures, and there were these legal things like the fairness doctrine, you know, in the like late 40s, 50s, where it's like you have to tell like these opposite sort of opposing views, right? And that was the law, because they didn't want television just going like with one perspective. They got rid of that. Reagan got rid of that. It is part of the reason that we face the challenges that we face now. But what that sort of created is not like, you can't kind of say, okay, we told both sides of this. Because when it's like, okay, Democrats want to have a really, really strong health insurance industry, and like Republicans want to like take away your health insurance, like, what does that kind of, that's building like a border around the thing. That's not telling both sides. That's not saying anything to the person who is, you know, the black woman who's living in a ghetto that was created by that same government that created this structure. It doesn't mean anything to her. She's like, I don't have any health insurance. But she's not in that story. You didn't tell both sides of that story. There's no both sides. So I think kind of the idea of like having sides in any of this is maybe just the wrong thing anyway. Maybe it's a color, maybe it's a shape, like it's something else. It's not sides.
Yeah.
And so like the challenge I think is pulling in these new textures to be able to talk about the reality, like the truth that we see in the world.
Yeah. Unique perspectives.
Unique perspectives, and the ones that have not been in the stories for a long time. And that's something that I think is sort of changing.
Yeah.
But again, we see a genocide. Like we see a genocide. And we will listen to the radio and it will tell us they talked to Israel and then they asked Hamas and they did not respond. And then say nothing of the Palestinian people. And then say that they talked to both sides. This is National Public Radio. I said don't get me started.
Yeah. Yeah, or like even like the use of the passive voice about something, right? It's like, oh, this is happening, but never who and what. Yeah.
I have one. Like, don't want to get too caught up in history, but in any piece that I write, I'm always going back to history because I think there's also sometimes like pretend that something that happened 10 years ago doesn't have impact on today, or something that happened 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And I just think like there was a man that was lynched here in Oregon, and the way that it was reported was that it was a quiet and orderly crowd. I believe his name was Alonzo Tucker, is that right? Yeah, Alonzo Tucker in Coos Bay. And the way the news reported it was not that this was, a murder of a man, and that it was shameful that a crowd of people watched this man get hung, and I think about these things oftentimes, like, and I think there's an over reporting in Oregon on trauma in black spaces, in the flat sense of it, like in the flattest possible perspective of what the trauma is, and then not like nearly the same amount of attention on people who are building and creating things, and making change and doing the things that, and also obscuring the fact that that's like a rich tradition here in Oregon with black folks, and so it's the same with black Americans generally. Like there's a rich tradition of black people resisting the conditions here, and also just having normalcy, but I guess inside of that, those things both being true, there's just, there's not, you said the word texture, there's not nearly the texture given to the weight of the system that is coming down on black folks in this state, and how many people are responsible inside of the systems for the conditions that we talk about. Like that is never given the true weight. And so, because we come from what people call rugged individualism, a lot of the things that come down to the things that we don't like, of course we don't, like somebody gets shot, or somebody is sleeping outside, or robbery, whatever those things are, it's never told through the lens of like a system, and let alone like when we're talking about things, and please don't believe I'm saying that a shooting is a black thing, because that's not at all what I'm saying.
We will pull the clip.
But if a shooting does happen in Oregon, unless it's like a lone wolf type of shooter, we rarely say this is a mental health shooting. We don't go and say like that was actually mental health, but we'll dive in with what drove this person, if it was like an individual that went and shot somebody high profile, so to speak, or shot people in mass. We just don't give that same credence to the everyday ways that systems come down and create trauma. So, anyways.
I mean, it's huge, and yeah, coming in here as someone who like is learning a lot from what you're saying, like in terms of your efforts, is it about dismantling this illusion of objectivity? Is it about getting access to these stories that, you know, wouldn't be told? Like, where is like the weight and the importance now? What's the priority of journalists? Like, I don't know. That's it's a sort of off script question, but yeah. How can journalists help? Yeah.
I think that journalists can help by just like bearing witness to these times. And I think that like that term bear witness, like I feel like is maybe like a bad word in some corners of like journalism. Like you're supposed to be doing something else. You're supposed to be like presenting data or something, you know? But like there's data. We have data, we can include data, and we can bear witness to what's happening at the same time. Like everything that kind of gets printed is going through some sort of a filter. This is a human thing. Language itself is a human thing. We take it for granted.
Yeah.
It's something that we speak, you know, we communicate through, but like, I don't want to get too out there, but like, it's just me.
Yeah.
Like, where's the line for that? Like, if language is just something, you know, English, like we're speaking in English right now.
Yeah.
We've already determined that like, we're perceiving these things and explaining them through
there's a
English.
lens,
We've
yeah.
already taken like a whole bunch of people out of the scenario, right? So we're already doing it. Just by being here and talking about it, and we're doing that by printing it in newspapers and talking about it on the radio. So we're only trying to determine now where the line is. And I think that we can bear witness to things. I think that we can present data. We can try to move people. You know, this kind of comes back to that sort of like taking for granted what like the thing is, right? The white thing that was created to be objective. Like, I will get, you know, maybe like a criticism of my work might be that I'm like a homelessness advocate, if I was to guess what the criticisms might be from those power structures. But I don't see anyone upset about some of the larger, smaller, local, international, whatever, for-profit newspapers being business advocates.
Yeah.
No one has ever said that to me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just a business advocacy newspaper. And I know every single person here has a thought in their head already about what newspapers I'm talking about. But no one's ever said that to me. Why? Because like that's the standard. That's just like, that's okay to do that. I
Yeah.
said, don't get me started.
Yeah. No, it's good. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So this past summer, I put out a magazine with the Portland Mercury called Blackout, a 5-year retrospective on Portland's racial justice protests. And it's a dozen essays and interviews with black folks from Portland working across different sectors, you know, from mentorship to government to, you know, even doing work in the suburbs. Bruce Poinsett, who you'll hear from, has a piece in there. I'm talking about symbols and the way they all showed up in 2020. And the core reason that I created the magazine was because 2020 is literally one of the most important times that has ever happened in human history. Period.
Yeah.
And we have stepped out of 2020 and got right back to a lot of the things that we said never again or never forget or all of that good stuff that sounded nice. And then it would have been true just as a statement right there, but you add on the fact that we had the largest protest for Black lives in human history in 2020 on top of that. And I knew going in to, you know, coming from 2024, looking to 2025 and knowing that George Floyd was killed in May, that the most that would likely happen in our media ecosystem here in Oregon is maybe talk to quote unquote, a few community leaders about where we are, how far we've come, what work we have to do. And that story is so much deeper than like a 1 minute, 2 minute news clip, and then we move on from that.
Yeah.
And so when I approached the Mercury, it was like, I want to have essays from Black folks across different perspectives to talk about this time. There's a lot of hurt here, there's a lot of lessons here, and there's a lot of need, even for my own self, to process what was that. And I wanted to make sure it was something that was in people's hands, because we live in a digital ecosystem. And so because things are so driven by clicks, it's easy to like see something online and be like, oh, that was cool, and move on.
Yeah.
But I knew if it was something that was physical and it was beautiful and
Tangible,
it was
yeah.
community rooted, that people would hold on to it, and it would allow the conversation not to just be an asterisk to Portland as like the conversation around hashtag riots, and not bring it back to the heart of what drove that moment here in Portland, 100+ days. And I'm not saying all parts of those 100+ days are like what I'm about, but I will say ultimately at the core of what I'm about is our collective liberation. And so like Blackout is, again, not being a journalist, but being like very intentional around media, and knowing that media story, in particular stories, because no matter if you're a journalist on the beat or working in communications or you're doing kickstand comedy, like stories are the connective tissue to all of us.
Yeah.
And stories are one of the most important tools that we have. And so there is a lot of time and energy and resources spent on telling stories about each other. And there's an investment in keeping certain stories obscured as well. I know I said some of the things are not intentional and insidious, but there has been a deeply insidious story or level of storytelling here in Oregon around Black people.
Yeah.
You know, again, talking about Alonzo Tucker, that's not long ago. And talking, you know, Oregonian had put out their thing, Publishing Prejudice, some years ago, where they were reckoning with the fact that they had done a lot of racist storytelling. It's good that they reckoned with that, but like, what does that mean for people who are living right now that still got propagandized for decades around what Black people's existence is here? What does that mean for our future? You know, a lot of those people that are making comments that are crazy are not bots. They're your neighbor.
Yeah.
We have time for about one more on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy topic. I mean, I think what we're getting to the heart of here with this whole panel is like, who gets to tell Portland's story? Who's part of that? Who's included? Yeah, I know you work on this campus at PSU. Yeah, what do you think about this lens of objectivity and truth, and who gets access to sort of tell their story? Yeah.
I've just been kind of sitting here. That's like the great part about being a student, is like absorbing information from people who know more about this than you. I got to use my philosophy degree for something
Yeah.
here. So yes, like the criterion of objectivity in journalism is deeply problematic, because we're applying this criterion to relationships ultimately, because stories are about relationships, how we relate to one another. And so having this objectivity criterion, which we didn't have any say in creating, applied to these relationships can cheapen these stories. And I think that replacing it with a criterion of care almost, and having that objectivity emerge from the relationship rather than be applied to those relationships, does create a more caring kind of journalism. And it does allow for journalists to report on their own communities without, like you said, historically, like, oh, you can't report, you're too close to that subject matter. So that care should be celebrated rather than discouraged. Journalists should deeply care and be motivated to want to care even more and see the world care for their communities more within these spaces, rather than be discouraged from caring about these things.
Yeah. I love that. And let's segue into our next session, or our next topic in this particular panel, which is about covering communities. So yeah, obviously journalists come into communities to try to tell stories, and there's a balance to find there. There's some sensitivity around that. So yeah, if you want to address any particular part of covering communities, just yeah, let's talk about that. How do journalists act as this medium to tell these stories? Yeah.
The thing that I coach people on when they're volunteering and becoming journalists at KBOO is this idea that people are the experts on their own experience. So whoever you're going to, and this is, again, we've been talking about sort of like the dominant ways in which journalism more broadly, the media landscape sometimes treats people like very unfairly, very, in those dominant narratives. But if we can come at it from a perspective of whoever I'm talking to is the expert on what happened to them, is the expert on the decisions that they made that brought them to this point, I think it allows for a little bit of a pivot, and it allows us to tell the story in a more authentic way. I'll also make a plug for, when we're talking about covering community, like I think radio is something that's really, really powerful for that, because one of the things that drew me to journalism in the first place was this ability, like the power that it had to enable people to make decisions about their own life, and that you're allowing people to speak for themselves. In radio, that's extra true. First of all, you don't have to be able to read to be able to listen to the radio, right? But you're also giving somebody a microphone, hearing directly from them, instead of a pull quote, say, in a newspaper where, that can be, that has its own sort of like politics of how that gets put together, not all of which is insidious, of course. But I think that, what radio and the audio medium can allow you to do is to really be transported, to be somewhere with people in a way that I think is transformative in a sense, especially when, if you're covering, if your audience is now experiencing a community or a community event or something that they're not totally familiar with, like they can be more, you can experience it without, maybe the judgment that like visuals or like TV news might engender.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
I think it I like what you're talking about with like relationships and stuff too. And I think that like you don't always in journalism have to agree with the people that you're putting in stories. For me, like having like relationships is actually just kind of a central like tenet of what I do. It's like whether I agree with people, disagree with them, whatever. Someone was saying to me the other day, like a rule in like kind of writing stories is like no surprises. Don't just like throw someone in a story and then never talk to them.
Yeah.
It's like pretty basic, but to an extent that comes down to like relationships in your community more broadly, being a part of the world that you're in, and not just like, again, like fly on the wall kind of thing. And so for me, it's like, another sort of basic tenet of journalism, like protect your sources. That doesn't mean that you can't hold your sources accountable for things that harms that they've done. But I do think that kind of ensuring that people, if they read the story, they come back and they go, I don't love it, but that is kind of what happened.
Yeah.
Is kind of like an important aspect of like getting into this thing. And I don't know, that's just like for me, like something that like my work kind of comes out of.
Yeah, one of the prompts was to talk about sort of slow journalism, if whether or not that's a thing, and how over time do you construct these relationships and build rapport and develop practices to give agency to these communities, or practices that help share that space. Any advice for like best practices to give these community storytellers agency or credit or hold space for their stories? Like what are some practices you found when entering these communities that help that? Yeah.
sorry, I'm going to be dipping into my storyteller bag a little bit with this one.
Sure.
Not so much journalism, but so I'm an executive producer on this film called Where We Going? Power of Place, and it explores the premise of it is that it's a young black man from the whitest city in America going to the blackest zip codes in America, but he starts here, Portland, home, and he's speaking to Intisar Abioto, who is an amazing artist. If you don't know her, comes to Portland by way of Memphis, artists of all stripes. And then it dovetails with this larger story of Albina Vision Trust, which is the largest restorative redevelopment in the country, and it's right here in Portland. And in the process of telling this story, like, Intisar is a friend, somebody that I've known for quite a while, and so that's also the truth for the other producer on this, Zoe Poliafis, who's my partner. So, you know, we have a relationship and care for Intisar generally, like beyond, like, we want to tell this story. But the story that we were trying to tell is like, okay, she just curated the largest takeover of Portland Art Museum of black artists dead and alive from this region. 69 black artists at the Portland Art Museum. And she tried to take over the Portland Art Museum, tried to take over the home of Beatrice Morrow Kennedy, who is the co-founder of the Portland NAACP. And I also always hear this, if you've ever heard me speak, you have probably heard me say this, but she would be in your mouth just as much as Malcolm and Martin if she was not a black woman in Oregon, because her credentials are just like scrolls worth of like, first black woman that ran for office here in Oregon, first black woman to graduate from law school in the state. She ran a newspaper here called The Advocate. She was calling out racism at every juncture, including taking on the Klan. Like, she was amazing. Excuse me. And, you know, the home, her home, is in the Grant Park neighborhood, and it was on sale for more than $1 million. Intisar raised that $1 million in like a month, and even sat down with the owners of that home that showed her the relics from the NAACP that still are in that home today. And Intisar wanted to steward that place in the same kind of tradition and spirit as Beatrice, and it was sold to other people. And so, like, in our process of getting to tell that story, there was a lot of conversation that we had with Intisar. It was not just like, hey, we're gonna come film you. You know, we were talking to her about, like, what does that feel like? Are you okay even going down to the neighborhood to film? Like, that was her first time going back into that neighborhood since that had all happened and went down, was for our film. Yeah. You know, and so it was not like we just get a license to tell this story. It was a lot of intention, conversation, check-ins,
caretaking
along the way. And so I just think there are lessons in that for, like, if we have that level of community already with somebody, imagine for what other stories that you're telling, how much intention you should be putting into, like, making sure you're telling somebody's story right. You know, even as we've taken this story out across the country, you know, there's still been a lot of just, you know, letting her know, like, where it's at and things like that. And Albina Vision, I also now work at AVT. In the last month, that's become a part of my job title, but I'm not representing AVT here today. But ultimately, yeah, just kind of keeping people in the loop. Like, if you're still going to be on a big screen, you know, down in Texas, probably good, you know that.
Yeah, to know that, yeah. Yeah, any other thoughts from panelists about best practices to give these communities agency to tell their stories? Yeah.
Just to sort of cap off maybe a little bit of what Donovan was referencing, but that reciprocity, that accountability for how their voice, their experience, their understanding is going to be used, where will it end up? That's something that's important to people. That's like, you're giving that, you're asking them to give that to you for free. And we could get into talking about paying sources, but I don't think we should. But I think that's that's important, as well as like that being accountable for what you use it for, and being responsible for your own work, and being responsible to coming back to it later on if you need to make a correction or if it's worth revisiting. I think that's thinking about building ongoing relationships. That's something that I think the publications that we've talked about working with, that's something that's kind of nice, because we're not on necessarily like a 24-hour news cycle. We don't have to churn out a clip by in the next hour or something like that, and that can allow for more relationship building, deeper storytelling, and getting into, I think what's very, very important is context, and is something that is so missing from a lot of the quicker reporting that we see. And I think what allows for communities to have, to feel represented is like a deeper understanding, is a deeper representation of context, and that allows for more action, I think, as well.
We have about 5 minutes before the audience gets to ask you some questions, but I'm listening to all of you, and I keep thinking, and maybe this is silly, again, I'm not a journalist, but how do you as journalists, or how did you even keep yourself out of this, making yourself a central part of the story? Does that make sense? Because I feel like today especially, it feels to me like it's more about the reporter, it's more about the journalist than the actual community that they're reporting on. Or is that even a concern? Because it feels like someone like me, I can see myself inserting myself into the story in a way that I shouldn't have done. Does that make sense?
I think that can be a really big challenge, for sure. But starting with not talking in first person is nice, and just take out the I. But I mean, getting talking to people and having them not like as a trick, but say things to you that maybe this thing. Maybe you're at least asking questions. It's curiosity. Maybe a good lawyer ask a question that they already know the answer to sometimes. I mean, a lawyer all the time. Right. But for a journalist, maybe it's 10 is the answer to this thing. But you ask somebody else, what do you, blah, 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 and then they tell you that, and then you quote them in there, and you're not putting your perspective in there. That's just a little bit of a trick, I guess. But then you're, one of the main things about journalism is that you're going to tell someone else's story. That's a big part of the thing. So just kind of starting on that foot from the beginning is you will learn that thing later, or maybe if you're doing continuing coverage on a topic for years and years, you start to learn a whole lot about that thing. And so you have your kind of ideas about it. You end up with your opinions because of your reporting, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that does get lost often. Yeah. But the reporting thing itself is going in with a sense of curiosity and asking people their perspective on the thing. And then you kind of naturally are taking yourself out of it just by doing that. So if you're kind of hearing too much of the authoritative voice in that thing that's I think this, you might kind of think about that a little bit.
Yeah, I love this because we sort of disambiguated objectivity, right? Take ourselves out, and nice. Just as we bring this section to a close, I'm sort of curious also about how entering these communities, you probably have different kinds of storytellers that don't fit into this traditional journalistic frame. Is there a way for media to represent storytelling and stories that are sort of outside the box of these traditional media outlets and framework? How can we give these things bigger voice too and expand?
Yes, it's 2025. Do it.
Yeah.
Go do it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's my advice.
Yeah.
We have so many things at our disposal right now. If you have an idea for a thing, do it.
Awesome. Such a fruitful conversation. And really enlightening. Thank you all for that. I think then what we'll do is we will move to the audience asking our amazing panelists some questions. The way to do this is to step up to this microphone here. You can introduce yourself and then just be really clear about the question that you have for our panelists. If you have it for a specific panelist, let them know, but address the larger panel. There's a lot of amazing expertise here. So would anyone like to ask the first question of our panel? It's great.
And we have about 10 minutes
Yeah.
for audience questions.
Yeah, come on forward. Come on down to the mic, and thank you.
Hey guys, you mentioned not enough attention on the actual systems themselves for these issues. I was wondering what kind of changes, if you could see any in media or news, what would you like to see kind of focusing more on these kind of systems causing these kind of issues for everyone?
Yeah, I think back to the column that I just put out on, it's called a 10-year forgotten emergency, and it's about the fact that 10 years ago, housing advocates declared a renter state of emergency, not the state. And like I said, we're at the highest eviction levels in the entire history of the state. And what I tried to draw down with this is that the state of Oregon has a lot of responsibility. The state. The feds also have a ton of responsibility in why. And Reaganomics, is a big part of why homelessness is exploding all across this country. And we've never replaced the holes that Reaganomics put into every state, but also these states have responsibility. We continue to, most states continue to prop up policing poverty as the number one public safety. Even language matters, right? If we said poverty management, right? If that was how we talked about public safety, then maybe we'd have different conversations around what we're doing, but that's a whole other conversation. So ultimately, I think, language around things is something that I think about in terms of these systems. When I was a journalist, I had actually, I did a whole Q&A with the Gresham Police Department's spokesperson about gang-related. It wasn't anything that was pitched to me. It's just what do you mean? What do you mean? Because it is said every time there's a shooting, it's gang-related. Police say it's possibly gang-related, say it's not gang-related, but you all have some colors in mind as soon as you hear that word, right? And it's so, why even say it is really what my perspective was, especially if you don't have a rubric on it. Oh, the rubric is race, so you just didn't say that. But the Q&A was to get to the truth of ultimately what he said, which is, I guess we don't have a rubric for when we do and don't say this. So language matters, and I think on a larger level, just kind of asking the question of where did this particular outcome come from? And with the eviction thing, it's Reaganomics. Okay, the state has not enacted any policies that get at the root of the unaffordability crisis. Okay, and the county hasn't quite done that either yet. Okay, the city hasn't quite done that yet. Okay, and people keep saying I can't keep up, and people were saying that 10 years ago, and we still have the highest kind of policing enforcement that we've ever had. I just imagine if those dollars were spent back in the communities that we're talking about. So it's those kind of things, I guess. I think I went all over the place, but yeah.
No, that was great. Thank you.
The state cut eviction protection by 70% in the last legislative session, a Democratic supermajority, and then at the same time that they created a statewide temporary shelter program.
Yeah.
So we're going to be on a hamster wheel.
Yeah, more questions from our audience. Thank you very much. Yeah, here we go.
Hello, my name's Lanita Duke from Grassroots News Northwest. I just wanted to thank Althea and the rest of the panel. I do a podcast with Althea that's nationally syndicated, and she doesn't really promote herself the way that she should.
Great. What's the question?
The question is, Althea has brought a perspective of intergenerational. She has a different perspective because she's walked a different journey in life because she's a different generation than the other panelists. I was wondering, could you address how other generations view some of these issues? I know Donovan sort of touched on it, and as a longtime Portlander, you don't know what many of these folks know. And it's wonderful seeing you take up the journey. But I want to talk about intergenerational. How does that impact the way journalism is reported? And
Thank
I
you
see
very
you
much.
too, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Love the question.
We love Althea.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, enough. Yeah, I think the intergenerational aspect, I think it is important to address. Different mediums, I think different generations have different expectations of what their journalism, what their media should contain. And I think that there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. I think our next panel is a lot of more multimedia people that can speak to that a little bit. But I think there is a core of adding in context, a core of including historical context and reinforcing that repeatedly. I think, we can talk intergenerationally. I think there's also a difference in experience and a difference in the way that people interact with news based on how long they've been in Portland, based on how long they've been paying attention to the news. And something that I think about a lot and that I talk to folks at the radio station about is making sure that every story is something that you could possibly come at flat-footed, have not heard of these groups, have not heard of the dynamics in the past, but still be able to understand on a more global way. Like, I think probably all of us here are kind of news junkies. Like, I've followed every beat, but if I describe it from the most recent thing that happened, that doesn't get at necessarily the global picture of why it matters. And I always want to make the case to people about why something matters. And I think, the context is important for that. And representing sort of like the depth of experience, I think is part of that intergenerational thing too.
Awesome. Anyone else from our audience? Oh yeah, come on, step right up to the mic. Yeah, you got it. This is just so everyone can hear you. Yeah, that's great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi everybody, it's good to see you all. I'm Hannah. I report for X-Ray and a little bit for KBOO. And I'm just kind of talking about this idea of bias. I heard someone say recently that, if teachers are not taking it upon themselves to sort of change the narrative that they're told to teach children, then they're complicit in authoritarianism right now. And similarly, I think that us as journalists have a responsibility like that. So what do you all think is our responsibility or role in standing up to fascism and authoritarianism right now?
Big question. Yeah.
Oh, come on. This is a small question. How easy.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. I think that, recognizing that these are all sort of narratives, like coming from above, like this is spin, that our president is like the guy who's like very, very good at spinning stories. That's like the one thing that he does. His whole thing is built around being a television show. And so we have a responsibility, I think, to report with context, like a truer narrative. The thing that I think is that we're getting wrong that is worth considering, and I don't mean we, because we're all perfect, but the thing that, like, as a country we're kind of getting wrong in the journalism world is the news is not that Donald Trump said something. The news is that Donald Trump said something false. And here are like 100 different ways to verify why it's false. And that is what how journalism is failing right now. And so I think that our responsibility is to say, Donald Trump did this false thing. That trickles actually down to police say is like a huge trick that once you see it, you can't unsee it. These news stories, and there's a reason for this. They send out a press release. We all get them. And it says, police say this thing happened. And even before the press release is sent to the media, there are videos on the local television news saying exactly what the police just said, with like a background, a little video of something that happened 3 weeks ago or whatever. And like, that's not journalism, that's propaganda. So I think that our role is to actually add in all of this context, like you were kind of talking about earlier.
One thing I wanted to add, this is something that I come back to in my work, and I think goes to what you're saying, Jeremiah, is this idea that it's not about process, it's about people. And I sometimes get in the weeds on the process, and I love to talk about the process and what's going on wrong in our government or any of these types of systems, how things are supposed to operate. But I think we, especially in this time, but generally speaking as well, like centering on people impact, that I think is important. So we're not chasing our tails on, the authoritarians who are, running the news cycle. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to say to the police say thing, you know, how often since I think 2020 have you heard Portland Street responses? Like, and so like there's a level too of still ingrained like authority on public safety that the police have, that other organizations, even if it's like a popular program in our city, it still is not given the same credence like daily. Like there is a daily report on what police are doing. There's not that same thing happening. And so again, that comes back down to the root of community. Like there are so many things, there are trees falling in our community where people are actually building and doing things, and we just don't hear about it. And so I think part of the dance here is that you want to hold the systems accountable, and you also want to find the builders and spotlight it, because like the thing that Mondani, like one of the examples we can take from him is ultimately like that was a forward-facing vision. Like we all want to be able to believe in like there can be a different possibility, and we have to see the possibility. Like we don't just want him to call out, we want to say this is what we'll do next.
Right.
And so that's part of it, because Trump can make you feel like everything's falling, and a lot of stuff
Yes.
is falling.
Yeah, so spotlighting the builders. I think we're going to close out this panel. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. There's a second panel that's happening in just a little bit.